In this episode, we turn to a set of privacy harms that feel intensely personal because they use information as leverage against a human being. Blackmail is the threat of exposure to force someone to do something, such as paying money, sharing more data, or complying with demands. Appropriation is the taking or repurposing of someone's identity, image, words, or data for another person's benefit, often in ways that strip context and consent. Identity misuse is the broad category where someone's identifying information is used to impersonate them, steal from them, harass them, or damage their reputation. These harms can happen even when a system was built with good intentions, because attackers look for weak points that let them collect, combine, or weaponize data. Privacy engineering matters here because design choices determine whether sensitive details are easy to gather, whether identity signals can be abused, and whether victims have realistic ways to recover. When you learn to counter these risks, you learn how privacy protections translate directly into human safety. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to begin is to understand why privacy harm becomes leverage, because leverage is what makes blackmail different from ordinary embarrassment. Leverage comes from asymmetry. The attacker knows something the victim does not want revealed, and the attacker can reveal it quickly or widely. In modern systems, that asymmetry can be created by data that is unusually sensitive, unusually easy to share, or unusually easy to connect to a real person. A private message, a location trail, a contact list, a purchase history, or a set of browsing events can each become leverage if it can be tied to an identity and exposed to the right audience. Leverage is also amplified by permanence, because data that is stored for a long time or copied broadly is harder to contain once it leaks. Beginners sometimes think blackmail requires dramatic secrets, but attackers often succeed with ordinary details combined with fear and urgency. The engineering goal is to reduce the attacker's ability to collect leverage, to threaten credibly, and to spread harm quickly. Countering these risks starts with ruthless minimization, not because minimization is fashionable, but because you cannot weaponize what you do not have. If a service never stores precise location, an attacker cannot steal a location history from that service. If a service does not retain message content longer than needed, there is less material to threaten with later. Minimization also applies to metadata, because patterns like timing, frequency, and social connections can be leveraged even without content. When systems keep every detail by default, they create a rich resource for attackers, and they also create a tempting resource for insiders who might misuse access. Privacy engineering treats minimization as a protection against coercion, not just a protection against regulatory trouble. A good test is to ask whether each stored field could be humiliating, dangerous, or exploitable in the wrong hands, and if it could, whether you truly need it. When you build with that mindset, the system becomes less valuable to extortionists. Appropriation often begins with copying and repackaging, which is why you need to think beyond direct theft and consider how data can be lifted and reused. A person's profile photo, username, posts, or even small biographical details can be used to create convincing impersonations elsewhere. In some cases, appropriation is enabled by a system exposing too much by default, such as making full profiles public, allowing unrestricted scraping, or providing predictable access paths. Even when information is intended to be public, the ability to collect it at scale changes the risk, because mass collection supports mass abuse. Privacy engineering counters appropriation by limiting exposure, limiting bulk access, and reducing the ability to harvest identity signals cheaply. It also counters appropriation by reducing the ability to verify stolen details, because attackers often succeed by using accurate information to make impersonation feel real. If systems offer too many easy confirmations, like confirming account existence or revealing partial personal data, they help attackers refine their lies. Identity misuse frequently relies on account takeover and impersonation, but the privacy angle is not only about login security. Identity misuse also includes using personal details to convince others, such as customer support agents, friends, or financial institutions, that the attacker is the victim. This is social validation built on stolen data, and it becomes easier when systems display or share sensitive details that can be used as proof. For example, if an attacker can learn the last 4 digits of a phone number, a recent transaction amount, or a shipping address, they can sound credible in a conversation. This is why privacy-friendly disclosure practices matter. You do not show more than needed, and you avoid turning personal data into a password substitute. Beginners often assume that if the attacker cannot log in, the identity is safe, but many real-world attacks route around login by exploiting human trust and leaked details. Engineering defenses, therefore, include limiting what can be learned without strong verification and limiting what staff tools reveal during support interactions. One of the most powerful ways to reduce blackmail and impersonation risk is to control account and contact discovery. Many systems provide helpful features like letting users find friends, confirm whether an email exists, or see whether a phone number is registered. These features can also be abused as lookup tools that help attackers build target lists and confirm identities. If an attacker can ask, in effect, "Is this person on the service?" they can narrow their focus and tailor threats. If an attacker can test many addresses quickly, they can build a database of valid accounts. Privacy engineering counters this with guardrails like limiting how discovery works, slowing down repeated queries, and avoiding responses that confirm too much. The beginner takeaway is simple. Convenience features can become reconnaissance tools. The goal is to preserve legitimate user value while removing the system's usefulness as a directory for abusers. Another angle is to focus on linkability, because blackmail and appropriation become more powerful when a dataset connects many aspects of a person's life. If a system ties together identity, social graph, location, content, and purchases under a single stable identifier, then a compromise yields a complete story. That complete story is exactly what an attacker wants for coercion. Privacy engineering reduces linkability by segregating workloads, scoping identifiers, and limiting cross-domain joins, so that even if one area is exposed, the attacker does not automatically get everything else. This also helps victims because containment is possible. You can isolate what was affected rather than assuming total exposure. For beginners, it helps to think of linkability as the glue that turns scattered facts into a weapon. Reducing that glue is a direct countermeasure against extortion and identity abuse. Data integrity also matters in this threat space because identity misuse is not only about stealing identity, but also about distorting identity. Attackers may change profile details, post content as the victim, or plant false information to damage reputation. Even if the attacker cannot steal money, they can still steal trust by making the victim appear unreliable or harmful. Privacy engineering counters this by treating key identity fields and account state changes as sensitive actions that require stronger assurance and careful logging. It also means designing systems so changes are visible to the user, reversible when possible, and recoverable through trustworthy channels. A system that allows silent changes to contact details or recovery options creates a trap where a victim can be locked out and then coerced. The broader point is that protecting identity includes protecting the truth of what the system says about a person, not just preventing outsiders from reading it. When blackmail happens, speed and spread are part of the harm, which is why limiting exfiltration and limiting amplification are crucial. Exfiltration is data leaving a system, often through bulk exports, overly broad APIs, misconfigured storage, or compromised accounts. Amplification is how quickly the stolen data can be distributed, such as through public links, searchable dumps, or automated messaging. Privacy engineering reduces exfiltration by enforcing least privilege, monitoring unusual access, and limiting bulk data operations to tightly controlled paths. It reduces amplification by avoiding public by default sharing modes for sensitive content and by controlling how widely links can be used. Even without discussing specific tools, the design principle is that the system should not make it easy to grab everything at once or to publish it instantly. If you narrow the pathways for mass extraction and mass sharing, you shrink the attacker's advantage and buy time for detection and response. Appropriation can also occur through content misuse, where someone takes images, posts, or messages and uses them out of context to humiliate or manipulate. Systems can unintentionally enable this by making content too easy to copy, by storing it longer than needed, or by exposing it to broad audiences without clear boundaries. Privacy engineering responses include controlling audience scope, setting sensible defaults, and ensuring users can understand and manage who sees what. It also includes limiting the permanence of certain sensitive content categories, because content that lingers becomes future leverage. Beginners should see that the same design choices that support healthy sharing also reduce abuse, because abusers thrive on ambiguity and frictionless redistribution. A system that supports contextual sharing without making everything globally extractable reduces appropriation risk. The underlying discipline is to match visibility and retention to the user's intent, not to maximum platform growth. Another common driver of coercion is exposure of relationships, because a person's connections can be leveraged even when the person's own content is limited. Contact lists, social graphs, group memberships, and interaction histories can be used to threaten exposure to employers, family, or friends. Even knowing that two people are connected can be sensitive in certain contexts. Privacy engineering counters this by minimizing relationship data, limiting who can see it, and ensuring that discovery features do not reveal networks unintentionally. It also includes treating relationship metadata as sensitive, not as harmless structure. For example, showing mutual connections or suggesting contacts can create unintended disclosures, especially for people who need separation between parts of their lives. The goal is not to prevent all social features, but to design them so they do not become a map for harassers. When relationship data is protected, blackmailers lose a key pathway for making threats feel personal and immediate. Victim support and recovery are part of countering identity misuse because engineering is not complete if a user cannot regain control after an incident. A privacy-respecting system anticipates that some attacks will succeed and builds humane recovery paths. That includes making it possible to report impersonation, recover accounts, and stop ongoing abuse without requiring victims to expose even more personal data than necessary. It also includes designing support workflows so staff cannot be easily tricked into handing over access, which means support processes should not treat personal trivia as sufficient proof. Recovery should also prioritize containment, such as revoking sessions, resetting recovery options, and alerting users to key changes. From a beginner standpoint, it helps to see recovery as a privacy control because it limits the duration and severity of misuse. If recovery is slow or impossible, the attacker's leverage increases and the harm becomes compounded over time. Detection is another essential component, because many coercion and impersonation schemes rely on repeated attempts and unusual patterns. Attackers probe systems, test identity details, and attempt takeovers at scale, and those patterns can often be distinguished from normal user behavior. Privacy engineering supports detection by ensuring that sensitive actions are logged, that access patterns are observable, and that protective friction appears when risk rises. Protective friction might include additional verification, temporary limitations, or requiring stronger assurance for sensitive changes, but the high-level point is that the system should respond to signals of abuse. Detection also applies to data extraction, because abnormal querying and bulk access are common precursors to leaks and blackmail campaigns. When detection is built in, incidents can be contained before data becomes leverage. The system becomes less predictable to attackers, which matters because attackers prefer systems that behave the same way every time. A careful privacy engineer also considers insider risk, because identity misuse and coercion can be enabled by internal access that is too broad or too casual. Even one person with excessive access can leak data that becomes blackmail material, whether for profit or out of malice. Robust guardrails, therefore, include restricting internal access to sensitive datasets, monitoring unusual access, and designing internal tools to show minimal information by default. It also includes ensuring that exporting or copying sensitive data is controlled and auditable. Beginners sometimes think insider threats are rare and dramatic, but many harmful disclosures are opportunistic and incremental, like copying a list or taking screenshots. Designing internal workflows that reduce temptation and provide accountability is a practical privacy defense. When internal access is disciplined, it becomes much harder for anyone to create coercive leverage from inside the organization. All of these defenses become more defensible when you can explain them as a coherent strategy rather than as isolated tricks. The strategy is to reduce the supply of leverage by minimizing sensitive data, shorten the time it exists, and reduce the ways it can be linked into a profile. It is also to reduce the ability to harvest identity signals by limiting discovery, limiting public exposure, and constraining bulk access. It is to protect identity truth by controlling sensitive changes and making account states recoverable. And it is to reduce the speed and spread of harm through controlled sharing, detection, and response. When someone asks why your system is designed the way it is, these are the arguments that stand up to scrutiny because they connect directly to human harms. Privacy engineering becomes credible when it can point from a control to a real reduction in coercion and misuse. As we close, remember that blackmail, appropriation, and identity misuse are not abstract threats reserved for famous people or rare scandals, because ordinary users are targeted every day with surprisingly small pieces of information. The reason privacy engineering matters here is that these harms are built from the same raw materials your systems handle routinely: identifiers, relationships, content, and logs. By minimizing what you store, limiting linkability, controlling discovery and disclosure, and designing recovery that restores control, you reduce the attacker's ability to turn data into leverage. By treating internal access as a risk surface and by detecting abnormal patterns early, you prevent small weaknesses from becoming mass exploitation. Most importantly, you design with empathy for the person on the receiving end, because the impact of misuse is fear, confusion, and loss of autonomy, not just a technical incident ticket. When your guardrails are built around limiting leverage and restoring control, your system becomes a safer place for people to exist without being turned into targets.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.